Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the second method of interacting with the scale, rotate and translate manipulators. And that's what we call the soft image transform manipulators, or 3D manipulators. And you can enable them simply by going to the transform menu, enable transform manipulators, or under transform preferences, use 3D manipulators. So we'll just enable those. And you can see also there's a lot of options possible. We'll go into those in a little bit of detail in a second. So the actual procedure for these manipulators is very, very straightforward. To scale or rotate or drag an object, I just grab hold of the axis and pull, and it constrains the movement to that one axis. If I grab in between two axes, it will constrain the movement to that plane. If I grab in the middle of the objects, it will move in all three axes simultaneously. You get at all times a visual feedback of what exactly will be happening. You can see that the mouse cursor is changing depending on where I am. To constrain the movement in just one axis, I can double click on any given axis. To add another axis to that selection, I simply hold Shift and double click on it. You can see that here it's now adding these axes in. Furthermore, as I go into, for example, the rotation panel, you'll see not only do I have X, Y, and Z, but I also have this gray outline, which is the view axis rotation. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the extended possibilities of this manipulator tool. First of all, I have the click outside manipulator options. And what that gives me is the behavior that will be given by XSI if my cursor is outside the influence of these axes. So for example, if I now click on this object, it's going to select it because I have the selection tool enabled. The second method is simple transform. Now what that does is, if I'm outside this area, left mouse button will just transform in all three axes, but the middle mouse button will be an intuitive tool which interprets your mouse movement and translates that into the axis the intended movement is supposed to go into. So for example, if I just hold the mouse and drag up, it's going to see that I intended to drag the object in Y and will interpret it and move it as such. Oops, there we go. Okay. Finally, we have, here, 3D, SI3D style transform, which is simply the first style of interaction, which is three axes, three mouse buttons, three colors, quite simple. When I'm outside the sphere of influence of this manipulator, it's going to be the soft image 3D. When I'm inside it, I can grab the axes. Right. The second option here, which is rotate interaction style, spherical or linear, is best demonstrated if I go in here. Now, you'll see if I grab hold of the Z axis and rotate my mouse cursor in a clockwise direction, you'll see that the object follows that rotation. If I go to linear and do the same thing, you'll see that it doesn't. What it does is it goes backwards and forwards. This is because currently I'm using a linear motion to drive the rotation. If I go back onto spherical, you'll find that the linear rotation will only work up to a certain extent, and it's much more of a circular rotation. This is entirely up to you, your preferences, and that's why we have it. Default is spherical. Translate scale interaction style. You'll see that we have currently axes and planes by default. That means that I can select either a plane by clicking in between two axes or just a single axis by clicking on it. If I go to axis only, you'll see that it no longer interpolates when I'm in between two axes, so I cannot actually access the plane in the middle. Finally, extended axis and planes now extends the actual widget axis behind the object as well, just giving me a little bit more area to actually grab hold, especially with complicated objects. This can be very useful.